Okay, welcome to the directions hearing for the Victorian Murray Floodplain Restoration Project Environment Report Central Package. The package includes the VMFRP, Naya and Burra Creek projects. My name's Nick Wimbush, Member Wimbush. I'll be chairing this particular package and of course I'm a co-chair of the Standing Inquiry and Advisory Committee as well, known as SIAC. I'd like to start by acknowledging traditional owners. On behalf of all of us, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and waters where we meet and work today. In my case, that's the Bunurong people, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'd particularly like to acknowledge traditional owner groups in the project areas, including the Wamba Wamba, Barapa Barapa and Wadi Wadi peoples, and pay our respects to their elders past and present. I also know others here today may be on the lands of other traditional owners, and I acknowledge those peoples as well, and the unbroken ongoing connection to country of all First Nations peoples. We are holding this directions hearing on Zoom, as everyone can see. Just to note, I'd like people to use their full name when naming themselves. We have an Arvish and a Daniel. If you could please put your full names into the, rename yourselves to your full names. We'll be using the raise your hand function if people need to speak today, and then I will invite people to speak when hands are raised. We do have a lot of material to get through today, so please don't leap to raising your hands until we've worked through a majority of the issues that we need to discuss. If you need technical support this morning, I understand that's provided by the proponent. There is a phone number for technical support. If you have a pen handy, good old-fashioned pen, you might want to write this number down, 03, obviously, 5051 0700. Also, if need be, you can email Amy, who most of you would know, at vmfrp.siac@delp.vic.gov.au. But I would try the phone number first if you have technical issues. The purpose of the directions hearing today is to introduce the committee, introduce the parties, consider preliminary and procedural matters, make arrangements for the roundtable, advise of the proposals for the site inspection, consider timetabling of the roundtable and the conduct of the roundtable, and also to answer questions that people may have about the process. We obviously won't be getting into any merits discussions today about the opinions on the projects that will come through the roundtable process. I'm just going off camera just for 2 seconds, just bear with me. Okay, firstly, some introductions. Firstly, the committee. As I mentioned, my name is Nick Wimbush and I'm chairing this ER Central process. With me today is Member Kendall, who many of you would know chaired the EES Central process and is obviously also a member of the broader SIAC. Member Kendall is just here today in place of Mr. Trevor Blake, who will be the second member when the roundtable commences, but Mr. Blake was unavailable to attend today. Mr. Blake and I are being assisted by a technical advisor. That technical advisor is Ms. Sandra Brisger, who is also a member of the EES Central Committee. Again, as many of you would know, we're also being assisted by Amy Silverage, who's the Senior Project Officer at Planning Panels Victoria. If you have any queries after today, then please use Amy as your central contact on that email address I provided earlier. And that's also on the letter advising of this directions hearing. I'd like to ask other parties, particularly those who wish to participate in the roundtable, to now introduce themselves, starting with the proponent, Lower Murray Water.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Mr. Kendall. Pardon me, Member Kendall. Robert Forrester, I'm a barrister appearing on behalf of the proponent, Lower Murray Water, and consistently with the arrangements for the EES Central hearing, Lower Murray Water will be participating as the proponent and on behalf of the partner agencies involved in the VMFRP projects along the Murray River. Together with me, I'm accompanied by and instructed by Ms. Everett and Mr. Bartley from Clayton Utes, and a number of members of the project team are also observing today.
Thank you. I see we have, just working through some of the people on screen, I see we have Department of, I'm going to get this wrong, Mr. Decker, Department of Environment, Energy and Climate Action, is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Member Wimbush. I had to write it down myself to make sure that I got it out right as well. Yes, I'm representing the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action.
You I get it wrong.
Particularly with respect to the interests of the Secretary as defined under the Conservation Forest Lands Act, largely around Flora Fauna Guarantee Act, and Native Vegetation Policy under the VPPs, and bushfire risk as it relates to the bushfire management overlay. I think they're the three main interests that DECA has with the proposal. I think, yeah, that covers off pretty well.
Thanks, Mr. Decker. And for the advice of others, DECA is the old environment part of DELP. Is that a fair, very brief outline summary?
Well, we used to refer to ourselves as the environment part of DELP when the Minister for Planning was part of the planning arm of DELP, but they're now part of the transport and planning. So our interests as they relate to EESs or matters under the VPPs are largely DECA's on their own, so there's no need to reference the environment portfolio anymore. Most of our interests relate to the environment portfolio within DECA itself. So yeah, we don't need to differentiate ourselves as much as we used to. We can just use DECA.
Thank you for that. Can I ask, I see Mr. Banfai here. Is someone representing Department of Transport and Planning Impact Assessment Unit? Could you please introduce yourself? DTP Impact Assessment Unit.
Sorry, I was just trying to unmute myself there. Yeah, Daniel Banfai here. I'm Senior Impact Assessor with the Department of Transport and Planning. And yeah, I'm one of the co-managers for the VMFRP project on behalf of DTP with Amy Young. Yeah, so we'll be just attending and listening in.
Mr. Banfai, can we just have a brief look at you? I do like to see people in these processes.
Yeah.
If you're in your gym jams, then let me know. Thank you.
I'm on my phone, but I'll try and get it going.
No, that's okay. We can see you. Thank you very much for that.
Great. Thank you. Bye.
Now, looking at some of our submitters, I see we have Environment Justice Australia here for Environment Victoria.
Good morning, Chair, and good morning, Member Kendall. My name is Natalie Hogan. I'm a lawyer at Environmental Justice Australia and will be appearing on behalf of Environment Victoria during this process.
Thank you, Ms. Hogan. I see Dr. Kelly there, another submitter. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning, Member Wimbush. I will be attending on behalf of Friends of VMFRP Park, a group that formed in 1996 and has had intensive interest, advocacy and action on protecting VMFRP Park and other red gum and black box floodplain forests in our region.
Thank you. Dr. Kelly, I think you also put in an individual submission as well. Is that correct?
Yes, I did that because I wasn't sure I was going to make the deadline for the group submission. So I just put the individual one in very quickly. There's been a lot of, everyone's busy nowadays, aren't they? But there's been a particularly lot of funerals happening in my world. So I was quite busy, and that's why I put one in. So I'm not sure if I need to say anything more for that.
Okay, for our purposes, are you happy if we consider those two submissions together?
I'm not sure what you need to. I don't understand how it makes a difference whether they're considered together or not.
The reason for that will become apparent, so we'll just park that for the moment. It's to do with the roundtable and how that's going to operate. So we'll come back to that issue.
Yeah, I would probably like to have one for myself, and then with our group, I could have another representative represent the group.
Yeah. Okay, that's well, as I said, we'll come back to that. There's a bit of discussion to be had around the roundtable itself and how it's going to operate.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's a time, but I would like to make a statement about this process and the difficulty for community people to be involved in it.
Okay, thank you. I see we have a few other people in the room. I'm just looking. I think most of those are with other parties. Can I just, I see we have EPA here. Can I just have you introduce yourselves? Ms. Bradley from the EPA.
Hi, yeah, I'm just listening in. I won't be making any presentations.
Thank you. And are there any other submitters in particular that I've missed who wish to make themselves known? No, I'm not seeing any. Thank you for that. As I said, we'll come back to the issue of the roundtable and how that's going to work a little bit later on. Just a few practical matters. The main thing we're going to do today, as you would expect, is work through the draft directions that were circulated last week. But there are a number of matters I just wanted to address before we get to those. Firstly, in terms of declarations, myself and Mr. Blake are not making any declarations in terms of conflict of interest in the matters that we're considering. Dr. Briscoe, I think, made some declarations in the first process around Trust for Nature, but I don't think they're relevant this time around for these projects. But anyway, those declarations are on the public record for anyone who needs them. The role of this committee, so the broader SIAC committee, the Standing Inquiry and Advisory Committee, has been appointed as both an inquiry under the Environment Effects Act 1978 to assess the environment report and environment effect statements where one exists. And the Advisory Committee, SIAC, is also appointed as an advisory committee under the Planning and Environment Act 1987 to advise the Minister for Planning on the draft planning scheme amendment that would facilitate the implementation of the project if it was approved. For ER Central, as I'm sure you're all aware, the assessment has been done through an environment report. The decision not to require an EES was made by the Minister for Planning on the 11th of June 2020. The conditions of a no EES, amongst other things, require the preparation of the environment report, and those conditions do, again, set out a fairly comprehensive list of matters that need to be addressed in the environment report. Scoping guidelines for the environment report were provided to the proponent in July 2021, and those guidelines and the no EES conditions that I've just mentioned are both included on the project website for those who wish to have a look at them, and obviously should have a look at them through this process because they're quite important to the consideration of the issues. The Minister for Planning provided SIAC with terms of reference dated the 16th of August 2022, which outline the advice she is seeking from SIAC. Clause 5 of the terms of reference provide detail in particular on what our role is. I'm not going to read them word for word, but in summary, the role is to, in this case, review and consider the exhibited environment report documentation and submissions, consider and report on potential environmental effects and benefits of each project and their significance and acceptability, consider Commonwealth matters of national environmental significance under the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act 1999, identify mitigation or avoidance measures to manage environmental effects and how these might be included in project approvals, consider the exhibited draft planning scheme amendments and recommend any necessary changes. And again, I would encourage you, if you haven't done so already, to review those terms of reference in detail, because they do guide quite carefully the work of this committee. The VMFRP, Naya and Burra Creek projects that we're looking at through the environment report have been referred as being suitable for a roundtable as opposed to an EES hearing, which again, many of you would be familiar from EES Central and perhaps other EES matters. What I want to do later on as we work through those draft directions is talk in a bit more detail about what the roundtable might look like and how it's going to work. The committee understandably has extensive reporting requirements, and these are included in clauses 47 to 49 of the terms of reference. Importantly for us, following the roundtable, our report must be submitted to the Minister within 30 business days of the completion of the roundtable process. An interesting element of the terms of reference, as you probably all know, this is one of 4 packages that are being considered by SIAC across the Murray floodplains in Victoria. In the terms of reference, clause 44 in particular and 49 to some extent foreshadow that each assessment package is to use relevant understanding from SIAC, previous SIAC processes. So in our case, obviously EES Central has occurred. As I mentioned, Member Kendall chaired that. We do have our technical advisor, Ms. Briska, who will be advising us on this one, but also has knowledge of that process in EES Central, and that we are hoping, including directions we're making today, which we'll come to, will all build on the work that's gone before in EES Central. The terms of reference to me make it clear that we're not starting each project from scratch, but this is meant to be a learning process across the 4 packages. I've mentioned a couple of ways that might occur, and there is the direction as I talked about. It does raise a number of other issues, such as when should we be looking at the report that EES Central prepares, of which I understand a draft is being prepared, but I haven't seen it at this point. We may get eyes on that report before anyone else does, before it's public. So there are a number of issues that are raised by the way the process is set up. I'm not coming to you today with answers on how all that's going to work, but it is just an issue we'll be keeping an eye on through the process as we work through. It's not entirely clear to me at the moment how we would deal with matters of procedural fairness if, for example, EES Central makes firm findings on a particular issue, which we think look good, but no one else in this process has got access to those. So we need to just keep an idea about, keep an eye on how we're going to manage that through our process. I'd also just say that I have been doing this sort of work for a very, very long time, and I will be, in terms of according procedural fairness, that will be one of the important things that have at the back of my mind at all times in this process, even though the process is set up slightly different to normal EESs and environment reports. In terms of ER Central, the proposal itself, as I mentioned, one of 4 packages within the broader VMFRP. The 3 projects within our package, I've mentioned them, are located along the Murray River on the Victorian side, commencing approximately 40 kilometres northwest of Swan Hill and going in a northwesterly direction from there. ER Central, to some extent similar to EES Central, will include construction of infrastructure such as channels, regulators, containment banks, drop structures, spillways, temporary or permanent pumping stations, laydown areas, site compounds and workforce facilities. Construction and upgrade of access roads will be required, as well as removal of native vegetation in construction areas. And sites will need to be, borrow sites will or may also need to be established to supply fill material to support construction. So a different part of the river, but some similar issues in terms of the things we need to look at through our assessment process. The submissions, we have received 14 submissions, which are all on the Engage Victoria website already. I think there's some of them may have minor redactions just for to keep people's personal information managed in accordance with our privacy statement, but they are on the Engage Victoria website. There's a number of supporting submissions. There's a couple of objecting submissions, and there's a number of submissions which also obviously are submitting on issues of detail and changes to the projects and arguably the process. Copies of the submissions will be provided to the proponent and agencies in accordance with clause 27 of the terms of reference. Amy is pretty sharp on those things. She may have already done it, but if she hasn't, that will be done in due course. I'd just like to stop at that point. I'm about to go into talking in a bit more detail about the roundtable, and then we'll work through our directions. Can I just ask if there's any questions about the things I've raised so far? And if you could put your hand up, please, if you have a question. No? Okay. In that case, we'll move on to the roundtable and how that might work. Planning Panels Victoria has conducted roundtables before in a different context. There's a couple of processes on the go at the moment in metropolitan Melbourne, including the Victorian Planning Authority Standing Advisory Committee, and I think the Major Project Standing Advisory Committee, where a roundtable format has been used instead of a, what, if I can call it, a traditional hearing structure. So the roundtable for this project, as you know, I think from the draft directions at this stage, is proposed to commence on Thursday, the 13th of April at 10 a.m. and will run for approximately 7 days across 3 weeks. We'll come to that in some detail a little bit later. The main difference compared to a hearing, as you saw in EES Central, for those of you in that process, is that it's meant to be run in a more informal meeting-like environment. There'll be more discussion rather than strict times for people to make statements to the committee. And obviously, as chair, I'll be managing how that discussion is run and facilitated. We are at this stage proposing to run it in a hybrid format. The committee is proposing to sit the main days in Swan Hill, and I understand the proponent has identified a venue, which I'll come to later. There will also be the capacity to join online through the Zoom package. How that's going to work in a meeting discussion-like environment, we'll need to just tic-tac-toe through that quite carefully on the days that we're doing it, to make sure that those who are joining remotely do have that opportunity to be engaged and respond. Importantly, expert evidence can still be provided, and experts can participate in the roundtable, but there won't be, as there is in a normal hearing, if I can call it that, there won't be formal cross-examination. There will be, as I said, more of a discussional, conversational exploratory approach. In that, I would expect the expert witnesses to be available through the course of the theme, not just come in, give their evidence, take some questions and go. I would anticipate they would be there right through their theme in the roundtable, so that if new issues come up, they can offer an opinion on the spot on those issues. All of these are up for discussion, I should say, but this is how I'm anticipating at this stage the roundtable will run. Legal representation, of course, is still allowed if parties wish, but again, the expectation is that being a more there will be less adversarial elements such as cross-examination, as I've mentioned. So I see the need for representation not being as great as there is in a formal hearing process. Having said that, I'm not sure I could, and we're certainly not going to forbid legal representation. So that is up to the parties as to if and at what level they do want representation in the hearing, in the roundtable. Roundtables, when planning panels have done them, are generally conducted by theme, and they will focus very much on the key themes that are under consideration by the committee. There's obviously a huge amount of documentation associated with these three packages and the environment report. We are really planning, partly based on learning from EES Central, to hone in on the ones that we think are most critical for the Minister and governments to consider and respond to when the reports land on their desk. We would encourage all relevant experts and parties with an interest in the particular theme issues to attend for that theme, but you don't have to attend for themes that you're not interested in if that turns out to be the case. And we will get to the suggested themes in just a minute. Importantly, and this is not in the directions, but it will be asked after today, when we're having a roundtable theme session on, for example, surface water, the expectation is there will only be one person from each party participating in that discussion. So if it's the proponent, for example, we would expect Mr. Forrester or another representative to be the lead in the discussion. And the same for all other parties, whether it's Dr. Kelly and Friends of NIA or whether it's Environment Justice Australia, one person taking the lead on engagement in that discussion. It doesn't mean you can't have someone sitting next to you, talking to you or passing you notes, or sitting behind you in a chair whispering in your ear. It just means that when I'm managing and facilitating the process, I want to be working with one person, not two or three from each party. So just bear that in mind. And if, again, in the roundtable itself, if parties need to take a short break to confer on an issue, again, we'll cope with that in the course of the hearing and run it reasonably flexible. And again, it doesn't have to be the same person all the way through. If Dr. Kelly wishes to be the participant in relation to surface water, another member from the Friends might be the participant in relation to terrestrial ecology, for example. So the load can be shared, so to speak. Importantly, for this process and for all processes like this, the written submissions that have already been provided will be considered by the committee. It's not a case of what happens at the roundtable is all we focus on. There's a number of elements that have been raised in submissions, which I suspect we won't spend a lot of time on in the roundtable, but the written submissions will still be considered by the committee, informing its recommendations. There may be questions about the roundtable process. Wouldn't surprise me at all. Just keep jotting them down. I think, again, we'll come back to it when we start talking about the format and the specific arrangements for the roundtable and the dates and themes and so on, which we'll do in the course of the draft directions. Just excuse me. I'd now like to move on to the draft directions. The set I'm working off are the ones that were circulated last week. There's a couple of additions and changes and things I want to talk about, which I'll raise as we work through them. But I do, my base is the ones that were circulated last week. So there hasn't been a new modified, updated set. What I'm proposing to do is just work through these. Some of them will probably require quite a bit of discussion. Some of them will be relatively straightforward. Obviously, we'll try and highlight the ones that require a bit more consideration and discussion. So working through them, we've asked the proponents in direction 1 to provide a brief submission outlining the key learnings from the EES central process. The reason, and we've asked for that by the 30th of March, which is next week, I think, 10 days away. Yeah, next week. The reason we've asked the proponent and not anyone else, I think it's easier if we get their view of the world and then others can respond to it through the course of the roundtable, rather than asking everyone to do the same job and us being provided with 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different sets of what's important in this process. So, Mr. Forrester, did you have any questions or comments about that?
No, thank you, Member Wimbush. We've seen the draft direction and commenced work toward it.
Thank you. And I'm not going to go to every party to ask if they've got comments on every direction. So if there's something you really need to feed in or ask about, please just put your hand up, or if your hand up is not working, then just jump in and let me know. The second direction relates to correspondence from the proponent, which identifies a significant number of tabled documents from EES Central, which is said to be relevant to our process. We have in that draft direction invited others to identify particular documents that are not on that list that I think are essential for our consideration. I'll just offer that opportunity now if there are other tabled documents from that process. This is not going to be a closed shop. If we're in the middle of the roundtable and it turns out that a document that wasn't on that list is critical, then obviously we can introduce it. But for our purposes and preparation, between now and the roundtable, we've still got a significant amount of reading and so on to do. If we can short circuit things by being taken to existing documents, that obviously is better from our point of view. So are there any other particular documents that people want to raise at this point? Otherwise, I'll get you to fire them in as soon as you can after today. And I should say the list from the proponent is fairly extensive in terms of the amount of documentation. So there is a lot in there that we're going to have a look at and work out what is particularly relevant to ER Central. Moving on to direction 3. Now, one of the learnings that is coming out of EES Central, and I should mention, just in terms of this information transfer, if I can put it that way, there was a meeting between myself, Sarah Carlisle, who's the lead chair of SIAC, Ms. Kendall, and Mr. Kirsch from EES Central a couple of weeks ago to talk at a high level about some of the issues from EES Central. There was no documents produced or minutes taken. It didn't consider the findings or recommendations of EES Central, and I think at that stage they weren't even developed. It was what I would call a neutral discussion of key issues from that process, which may be relevant in ER Central as well. So we have already started to think about some of the things that might be relevant in this process. Partly from that discussion, I understand that there was a lot of information and discussion and submissions in the hearing about the matters that are listed in direction 3. So what I'm suggesting We do have submissions on these already. We have written submissions on them. What I'm suggesting is that given the limited time we're going to have in the roundtable, these are not matters that I would expect that would be re-argued or re-ventilated in our process. EES Central, when it gets there, will make findings and conclusions and recommendations on these matters, no doubt, but they're not things that I feel, looking at the terms of reference, we need to go back through again in the roundtable. Moving through to recommendation, sorry, Dr. Kelly, you have your hand up. You're on mute at the moment.
Member Wimbush, I feel like you could say a little bit more about that, if this is the only time you are going to address that. You're probably referring to our submission and some of the other submissions that did bring into their submission the issues about the broader policy context, water availability, alternatives. So are you ruling out any discussion of those things?
I'm not ruling out discussion, but what I'm saying is if the issues raised in the written submissions, for example, are the same as those presented to EES Central, they don't need to be re-argued because they're already being addressed in EES Central. We're not going to go through all those issues in great detail again. So in terms of the written submissions, they're before us, we'll consider them, we'll put our report in based on them, but we're not allocating a lot of time in the roundtable to go through them again, because we don't think that's very efficient if that's already been done by the other part of SIAC in the first process.
Yeah, I mean, why isn't there just the same SIAC then? Like if there's that overlap of this.
Yeah, see, that's getting to the merits of why this whole process is running this way. And obviously I cannot give you any insight as to why SIAC was set up as it is, or why the different committees are doing different parts, apart from the obvious one of sharing the workload on what is a very significant number of projects. Yep. So why government decided to set it up this way, I can't give you any insight into that.
My comment would just be then, please, if this, for Friends of VMFRP Park, this environment report process is the main one for us. So, you know, the previous one we made comment on, but we are intending to be much more expansive and focus our time as volunteers much more on this one. So we would not want to have our voices diminished in that way, or not be able to put our arguments.
I think the nature of the roundtable and the fact that we've been asked to do this as a roundtable means the intention is very much to focus on the merits issues of the projects. So the physical infrastructure, we haven't been asked, as I read the terms of reference, to reinvestigate all the higher level issues around the Murray-Darling Basin Commission. Can you still hear me? Or
yep.
Unstable.
I can.
Yeah, thank you. So what I'm suggesting is that the roundtable itself, when we're face to face, will very much focus on the merits issues. There is that opportunity. Firstly, we already have your written submissions, some of which articulate these issues. There is also the process through the directions of providing further written submissions, but we won't be spending a lot of time in the roundtable process interrogating these again. That's the position as I'm putting it.
Yep. And you said before something about that this environment report is set up a little bit slightly, your words were set up slightly different. What did you mean?
I only in the sense that it is an environment report rather than an environment effect statement. I think that's what I was probably referring to. So, and because it's been referred to the committee as a roundtable rather than a hearing, the actual process of eliciting further information is different to the EES central hearing, as I've described. It's a roundtable, not a hearing.
Yeah.
So those are the key differences. The difference in documentation, I haven't interrogated EES Central for obvious reasons. I've got a lot to look at in ER Central, but it seems to me that the type of documentation that we're looking at is broadly similar. And obviously the policy context, I would assume, is exactly the same, or very similar. I shouldn't say exactly the same.
But you would see a similarity in the arguments given by the objectors that the context is relevant, and perhaps the terms of reference. I certainly will go and look at them again, but
Yeah, I do understand
right, that we can't. There's no chance of that there's any chance of the objectors being listened to. Then we're wasting our money with the whole thing, aren't we? With the whole process.
Yeah, if you read the direction 3 carefully, what it says is not that these issues are not relevant. It says that the EES Central Committee has already taken extensive submissions on them and will make a decision/report on them in due course. What I'm suggesting in that direction is that I don't think there's any point in rehashing those issues or going through those issues again while that process has already done it, and we're waiting to see what the results of that report are. So it's not saying they're not relevant or they're not important, and they are listed in the written submissions, which we'll have consideration of. But the focus of our roundtable, given the way it's going to be run, is really discussing the issues around the merits of the projects, not going back in time through the policy context and all the other things which have been, there's guidance in the terms of reference, but they've also been gone through in extensive detail in EES Central, as I understand.
And Mr. Wimbush, I couldn't put up my hand before because I forgot how to do that, but I did have a question. Are you called a SIAC?
So we're a subset of SIAC. So there's the Standing Inquiry and Advisory Committee, which has got about, I can't remember, perhaps 10 members on it. And the members and all their biographies are listed on I think on the Engage Victoria website, including mine.
Yeah, I know that, yep.
Yep. So this committee, as was EES Central, this committee is a subset of SIAC.
Okay. And
planning. Sorry, I should just say, so the other two packages to come, there's 2 more after this one, will be the same, presumably. They will have a subset of SIAC put on to consider them, possibly with joint membership through these first 2 processes, or at some way of integrating the information.
And that was decided on by Planning Panels Victoria?
I think the allocation of the subset committees is done largely by the lead chair and within planning panels, yes. Whereas SIAC itself is appointed by the minister. Yeah.
So my question was, can you, the subset, make a different decision to the EES Central SIAC? Can you make a different decision than them?
In essence, yes. We are a separate process, even though we're within the same program. Having said that, if they make findings on particular issues, whatever those issues might be, we would obviously need to be fairly confident in an alternative view. The way the terms of reference are worded, and I might just go to it, just bear with me. So clause 44, the SIAC should, as appropriate, use relevant understandings gained from SIAC's other public hearings or roundtable forums including to assist with common matters and consistency. So there's a lot of important words in there: as appropriate, relevant, common matters, consistency. So that's what we're working within.
Thank you.
It doesn't take away our capacity to come up with a different outcome. But if we were to do that in full knowledge of what EES Central went through, then obviously we would need to be very careful in arguing why we thought they had got something, I won't say wrong, why they took a different approach.
It is going to make it difficult though, because if you find something that different to theirs, well, they've already made their decision. So it's not like you can confer with them and advise them, well, have you considered this? Or so that the staggering of the outcomes, the decisions is quite
I think tricky is the word I would use.
Yes,
and as I said,
something a bit more fancy than that, but tricky.
As I said before, the way those particular terms of reference clauses are worded, we do need to work out how we're going to get the knowledge from that EES Central report, how we're going to use it, what it means for participants in ER Central. And I don't, as I said earlier, I don't have an answer on that yet, except to say that it's a watching brief, and we'll see what the timing of their report is and how it works in with our process.
Yeah,
but I am confident that we can manage it. It's just a question of how we manage it.
And just the last question is, when was the last roundtable in Victoria? So can you give me an example where a community's or a project has had a roundtable?
No, I can't, but I know there are, as I mentioned, 2 standing advisory committees where they're ongoing at the moment. So they have been, my understanding is, not me, I should say, they have been done recently, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but we can certainly find out for you when they've been used in recent times. Sorry, I was just going to say, as I mentioned, there's 2 standing advisory committees that I'm aware of. One is the Victorian Planning Authority, SIAC, and one is I might be quite a little bit wrong with the name, but the Major Projects Standing Advisory Committee, something like that, where they use roundtables, I think, on a fairly regular basis.
The name reminds me of the Knights of the Round Table. So hopefully there's a lot of chivalry and courage, things like that.
I think I would say I've done, I'm not going to throw numbers around because it sounds like I'm boasting. I've done a lot of traditional hearings, and I really do think this, if it's done well, and there will be judges of whether this is done well or not at the end of the process, actually does provide potentially a more facilitative, I think I've got too many to-to-dos in there, a facilitative process and opportunity for more open discussion than you sometimes get in a traditional person-by-person hearing. So I'm obviously comfortable going forward. If I wasn't, I wouldn't have accepted the brief, and I would be kicking up a storm about doing it some other way. I think the opportunity to focus on those really key issues through this is potentially certainly one we should take up, and I think it's got some benefits.
Thank you.
I'll just keep moving through. Confirmation of witnesses. Now, Mr. Forrester, you provided advice on Friday of your witnesses, which I think has been circulated to parties. Can you just walk me through that briefly, just your witnesses at this stage?
Yes, Member Wimbush, that was circulated on Friday. The intention is to call a witness in respect of groundwater, Mr. Hoxley, who was also a witness in the EES Central hearing, a witness in respect of surface water, and Mr. Treadwell, who again was present in the EES Central context, and then a witness in respect of aquatic ecology, Mr. Jean-Michel Bernier, terrestrial ecology dealing with flora, Drew King, and Terrestrial Ecology dealing with fauna, Christopher Watson. Those three are ER Central specific experts in the sense that they weren't involved in the EES Central hearing.
Thank you. I don't have, at this stage, I don't have an indication from any other parties that there's any other expert evidence which was due to be notified last Friday. I'm just confirming that's the case, in which case we won't be, I use the expression hot tubbing in the hearing. Just bear with me. Dr. Kelly, you've got your hand up again.
Look, I have to admit that I didn't read that letter from you very thoroughly. And so I did not know that that deadline was happening. In some ways, I feel like if things came from planning panels on paper, if they were sent through the mail, I might read them more, because sometimes when there's an attachment, you don't scroll down and find the attachment. So I'm not, would it be possible, I have to ask now for permission, is it possible that if we want to bring an expert witness that we can, because I did not know that that deadline was present, and it's my own fault because I didn't read the attachment, and I didn't read the dates, the key dates.
I mean, it was pretty clear in there, and yes, I do accept that there's a lot of information that goes out. The reason we do a lot in the draft directions is to give people the opportunity to think about these things before coming to the directions hearing. Having said that, what are you looking for? What would you like from us so that I can consider it?
A few more days to ask around if that's what our group wants to do. One of our members died last week, and we had a funeral on Friday in Melbourne. So yeah, we have not been speaking about this issue. We have been mourning our member who passed away.
My condolences. I've had as some of my people in this room know, I've had a very close family member pass away recently, and it's a very difficult time. So my condolences, as I said. I think what I would be willing to consider, and I'll ask if there's any objections to this in a minute. I think we could perhaps give you to say the end of Wednesday to confirm.
Yep, thank you.
Just bear with me. Does anyone have any objection to that?
No, thank you, Member Wimbush.
Okay. Dr. Kelly, we will provide written directions, but they might not come out until Wednesday or Thursday. But the verbal direction is if you, and this is not an open offer to all parties, but if you could confirm by close of business on Wednesday, if you are going to call evidence, and if possible, if you are going to provide the name of the witness as well. If that's not possible by Wednesday, we'll have a think about that, but certainly a positive indication if you're going to call evidence or not, if you could let us know by close of business on Wednesday, the 22nd of March.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I will try and read the correspondence a bit more thoroughly, but I think I just keep wanting you to remember that we are volunteers. We all have other jobs, and it's quite overwhelming to participate.
I do understand that, and that's partly why in the circumstances I am giving you a bit of extra time to think about that. We do need to know, because as you'll see with these draft directions, a lot of them are contingent on whether there's other expert evidence being called. So that's why we would need to know sooner rather than later. So end of Wednesday, please, if you could let us know.
In fact, thinking about how unfair it is when you've got, maybe I'll write something down rather than waste time here. Thank you.
Thank you. Just going back to the directions. I'm now on the circulated direction 5, the roundtable administration. I understand, as I said, we are proposing to do a hybrid hearing, so there will be some people in the room in Swan Hill and some people online, depending on where they are and their capacity to attend. Can I ask Mr. Forrester, we believe Ms. Silverage has been in contact with you about a possible venue. Could you perhaps outline your thoughts on that for us?
Yes, thank you. I understand the likely venue is the Grainshed Church of Christ. It has a suitable hall that we're in the process of working toward having set up, and ultimately subject to the confirmation of dates for the roundtable. That's likely to be the location for the venue local to the project area. Consistent with the draft direction 5, it's the proponent's intention to ensure there's facilities there for electronic participation inside the room, such that there's a screen able to be used to share presentations and the like, but also to ensure that people can both observe and appear from remote locations as appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Forrester. Just wanted to comment, I have been advised that the venue is likely to be the Grainshed Church of Christ. I just want to make a note that we're using that venue because it's effectively a function centre in Swan Hill, not because it's a church. I'm sure we have people of many different faiths in this hearing, and indeed people of no faith. So there is no particular statement about why we're using that venue, except that there are limited venues in Swan Hill. And I understand through Ms. Silverage that this one is likely to be suitable in terms of particularly the electronic component of the hearing, which, as you can imagine, takes quite some setting up to do a hybrid hearing. We do think, although for the last 2 or 3 years, planning panels and others have been doing all their hearings online, going back to traditional practice, we do think where possible, it's important to hold at least some of the hearing in the locality of the project that's under consideration. So that venue will be confirmed, whether it's that one or somewhere else in Swan Hill, will be confirmed at the next in the next set of directions.
Could I just say in that on that point, living in Swan Hill myself and being on the local council here, I find it strange that that venue is targeted when I would have thought the council would have offered a venue, or that the department may have a venue itself. It's kind of shows how.
Yeah, can I just say my understanding through Ms. Silverage.
Staffing is.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and I probably should have mentioned it. I of course am not talking to the proponent about this, but Ms. Silverage is on a daily basis. My understanding is they've looked at many venues. This is the only one that was available for the dates being considered. And I understand one of the venues looked at was the town hall. I might just make it very clear, I don't automatically leap to a faith-based hearing venue. That is just where we have landed in trying to find a suitable venue in Swan Hill. So there has been consideration of other venues. This wasn't the first pick, is my understanding.
Thank you.
The document sharing platform, Mr. Forrester, I'm assuming you're comfortable with that. That was done for EES Central, as I understand. All documentation, just looking at numbers 7 through to 10. Again, in these times, we prefer to do electronic documents for a range of reasons, including saving paper, but also the practical one of, I haven't seen a hard copy set of the documents for ER Central, but it would run to many, many shelves worth. So it is very difficult to transport them around the country. There are directions there for how documents are to be shared electronically. They're fairly standard and I'm sure are fairly similar to what was the case in EES Central. I did want to move to direction 11, traditional owner consultation. Now, under terms of reference clause 38D, we are to invite or advise traditional owners of the process and invite them to participate. We've put that direction in there. We're not entirely sure, and I have been talking to Ms. Kendall about the experience in EES Central, but where we landed in thinking about it was that we will ask the proponent to contact the traditional owners, given that they have been working with them, I understand, through the development of the projects. And we can either do that just by writing to the proponent, asking them to invite them. My preference, which I think we ended up in the draft direction, no, it's not clear in there, is that we will actually provide an invite from the committee to the proponent, who then provides it to the relevant traditional owners for this area. Mr. Forrester, could you perhaps just give me your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Member Wimbush. That's precisely the process I was intending to propose, and it's the process which ultimately was adopted in the EES Central context, as Member Kendall is of course aware. The engagement with the traditional owner groups relevant to these projects, as in the case in respect of EES Central, has been conducted by the Mallee Catchment Management Authority, and it would be our intention as Lower Murray Water, as the proponent, to again pass that invitation from the committee on to the relevant people through the CMA, and then to either ask or respond to a direction of the committee by the CMA, providing confirmation that that's been done, and updates to the committee in respect of any responses it receives.
Thank you, Mr. Forrester. And again, I should just note, my understanding is that the relationships, the traditional owner relationships in this area are still being settled is not the right word, but there is not, for example, registered Aboriginal parties in this area. So there are a number of groups who have an interest in a number of First Nations peoples who have an interest in the projects, and the starting point for consultation will be through the proponent. But if the traditional owners do want to, for example, meet with the committee, either on country or through the roundtable, then we would obviously make arrangements to do that as necessary.
Thank you, Member Wimbush. I should have noted in the course of my response to you too that part of the reason that sort of process is appropriate in Lower Murray Water's view is because of sensitivity associated with even the very identity of the people who would appropriately receive that invitation. And that's where the CMA's relationships are particularly useful for that process.
Thank you. Yes, I understood that from Member Kendall for EES Central. Dr. Kelly?
I just can't help but make a comment or make a comment there. It seems to be that the proponent wants to be the gatekeeper for TO input, and you know, I live here, I'm from here. There's this issue of identity, and I feel like it's that I just don't understand why they're being so tricky about it. And the other thing is that I feel that the TO groups here not having a RAP is a detriment to them, and I feel like it's being taken advantage of.
Thank you. Just to be clear, we don't see them as a gatekeeper. We see them as helping us to facilitate the contact with the appropriate people. And even what I've just said, you know, who are the appropriate people? We can do advertisements in the local paper. We can do broadcast, you know, correspondence to anyone TO in the area. But I do think from our point of view, it's better if it's done more sensitively with people who have direct knowledge of the TOs in the area. If the gatekeeper, you use that expression, if, for example, the proponent didn't identify some TOs and didn't contact them, and those people then approached the committee directly, it obviously leaves the proponent in a not great position. I would think they would be working very, very hard to avoid the risk of that occurring in facilitating our contact with those people. So your comments are noted, but my understanding of the sensitivities in the area, I really don't think there's another sort of practical way of doing it within the task that we've got. So thank you.
But can I just say that why would the proponent bring forward any TOs who object to the projects? Because it's in their interest not to do that.
You should be clear, we're not asking the proponent to contact friendly TOs, we're asking the proponent to contact all relevant TOs. If that contact elicitates a response to us, which is negative of the project, then it will be considered by us in our consideration of the 3 projects. If there's any suggestion that the proponent is only contacting friendly TOs in a public process like this, I would be very, very surprised.
Well, yeah.
Thank you. Just want to move on to the site visits. Items 12 and 13. The proponent, at our request, provided a suggested itinerary for an unaccompanied site inspection, which it's been tabled as table document 3 on Engage Victoria. Again, I'll just ask, it's clear in the direction, if there are areas which are not included in that itinerary which you think are critical to our understanding of the ER Central projects, then please advise us by, I think, what have I got there, Wednesday 29th of March. After that, there'll be an updated itinerary provided. Ms. Hogan.
Thank you, Chair. Just a query as to the reason that the site visit is proposed to be unaccompanied, and just wondering whether there's scope for the committee to be joined by members of the community and traditional owners, for example.
At this stage, no, we're going to do it on an unaccompanied basis. The reason being, from my long experience in hearings, sometimes they're done on an accompanied basis, but given the nature of the areas we're moving through, one reason is practical. I wouldn't like to take a group through some of these areas with potentially a trail of 4-wheel drives. So it will be the committee just doing it on an unaccompanied basis. Obviously, within the direction 12, if people want to tell us that they need us to look at, then obviously do that. But we're not proposing to change that at this stage. As I mentioned a minute ago, if there were TOs who wanted to meet on country to show us particular elements, we would consider such a request. We don't have such a request at the moment. Other than that, we are planning to do it on that unaccompanied basis. It's also, I found, yeah, anyway, Dr. Kelly, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Member Wimbush. I'm a bit taken aback by the unaccompanied tour thing, because in the 26 years that we've been a friends group, we've taken hundreds and hundreds of people through the forest on tours, and I unless you're accompanied by some people who know the place, particularly traditional owners, you're not going to understand fully what there is to see and discover. So I'm not sure who has advised you of that. I remember in 2005 to 2010, the VIAC process happened for the red gum forests, and our friends group took VIAC through VMFRP Park many times, and we would be very happy to take your committee through or to facilitate such an accompanied by even just 2 or 3 people with you, with the knowledge to understand the place. So I would urge a decision to be reviewed there, please.
Thank you. Just in terms of who made the decision, that is our call, the committee's call. We weren't instructed by anyone to do or not do an accompanied site inspection. You mentioned VIAC. Just for the record, I'm a member of VIAC. I wasn't at the time of the Murray red gum investigation, I should say. It's a different process we're going through here. VIAC was doing a broad range investigation into the future of the Murray River Forest, the red gum forests. This is a focused inquiry into specific projects. The reason for the site inspection is really for the committee to view those areas where there are going to be project works. That is the project that we're looking at. So we're not after a kind of a broad exposition on how the red gum forest works. We're looking at the project sites that have been exhibited in ER Central. That's what we're looking at. The other issues you raise are one of the reasons why it's very much about just looking at those project elements. From long experience in accompanied site inspections, we get a lot of people wanting to make submissions to us on the ground, and it's very difficult to manage. So for the reasons of practicality and the other ones I've just outlined, we are proposing to do an unaccompanied inspection.
Mr. Wimbush, also VCAT hearings have occurred up here, and the judge will take the parties out and walk on land and look at the site. You know, I expressed in the EES central package my absolute dismay and objection to them not having a site visit, and I will keep saying it here, and that is the position of my group. You won't understand the sites where the infrastructure is going to go unless you are there with a traditional owner.
Thank you. I won't go into EES Central. I gather they had different constraints related to environmental conditions. You're quite right, VCAT do accompanied inspection. They also do unaccompanied inspections, as do panels. So it just depends on the circumstances. And I think given the role that we've got and the nature of the country, we are proposing to do it on an unaccompanied basis. But I do want people to, as is in direction 12, to point out things that they would like us to look at as we're moving forward. Sorry, as we're doing our site inspection.
I think that I'm just going to say,
with Dr. Kelly, we've said enough on the site inspections. We're doing unaccompanied inspections, but your concerns are noted.
I think it's arrogant to think you're going to be able to see what is there without traditional owners.
I've been called many things in hearings. I'll take that one on notice, but it is about getting a general understanding of the project areas. I would not expect in a one-day site visit to these areas, whether with locals or traditional owners or others, to get a complete understanding of the forest. That is just not going to happen. What is proposed in our inspection is to get a view of the landscape in the country where the project elements are going to be constructed. But your concerns are noted. Thank you. Moving through the directions, number 14, number 15, just on number 15, Mr. Forrester, I understand a similar direction in EES Central resulted in the provision of a significant number of plans. Maps. What we're trying to get to is an overall summary map of the three maps of the three projects. If that's done at a larger scale, perhaps AO in preparation, but obviously then viewed electronically, we're trying to get a fairly simple single sheet overview of all that material. Now, I understand that it's that's a big ask given the amount of issues that we want shown on it, but that is what we would like the proponent to provide.
There have been some concerns expressed in terms of the ability to get that all onto a single map. But can I say for today's purposes, the proponent will do all it can to do so. If there are constraints which mean perhaps certain aspects of that information needs to be presented on independent maps, we'll let the committee know as soon as possible. Work's underway.
Thank you. If you could use best endeavours on that, just to make it easy to get a quick look over the projects.
Heard what you've said today as well. Thank you, Member Wimbush, and work will continue. Thanks.
Thank you. 16 is fairly... 16, did you have any questions or comments around that, Mr. Forrester?
No, thank you. That's clear.
I'm dropping in a new one after 16, which I'll now read out. It's come up in further consideration amongst the committee since these draft directions were prepared. The new one will read like this. The proponent must provide by 12 noon on Wednesday, the 5th of April, a summary and explanation of the conceptual models underpinning the intended approach to adaptive management of key environmental components or processes in the 3 ER Central project areas in relation to desired ecological responses to the environmental watering regime and potential adverse environmental effects and threats. So it's effectively, I know you don't have it before you, but it's effectively looking for more information on the conceptual models and how that will work in the context of the adaptive management approach that's proposed for the projects. And I understand was also proposed in EES Central. Would you like me to read that again at the moment?
I think that'd be useful. I've got it, but for those listening, and given I'll have to take some instructions on it before I can come back to you, if you can, Member Wimbush, that would be helpful. Thanks.
The proponent must provide by 12 noon on Wednesday, 5th of April 2023, a summary and explanation of the conceptual models underpinning the intended approach to adaptive management of key environmental components or processes in the 3 ER Central project areas in relation to A, desired ecological responses to the environmental watering regime, B, potential adverse environmental effects and threats.
Thank you very much. As I say, I'll seek some instructions at an appropriate time. Come back to you if there's any issue with that or any comment I'd like to make in respect of it. I do have one thing that's been flagged in respect of direction 16. Is it appropriate to raise that now?
Please.
Thank you. I've been asked if we can clarify. Direction 16 refers to information on the hydraulic effects of each project, including maps showing change in depth or velocity in a natural inundation event compared to a watering event enabled by the project. As the committee may appreciate, on the basis of its reading so far, the floodplains to which these projects relate contain existing alterations in terms of channels, blocks and so on. And the question is whether the committee wants the natural inundation event in the circumstances of the altered floodplains as they exist today before the projects, or the understanding of the floodplains in their natural condition before those artificial blockages and changes were put in place.
I guess the simple answer is, what's the project trying to achieve? Having said that, I'm going to take that one on notice because I'd like to discuss that with perhaps with Dr. Brisker and Mr. Blake. So we will clarify that as well. I think it's a fair question in terms of what's the baseline we're starting from. So we'll clarify that in the final direction.
Thank you.
Okay. You just mentioned you'll need to take instructions in perhaps in 10 or 15 minutes. We'll take a short break and then you can seek those instructions at that point. In italic direction 17, I had just put in there other critical material reports requested by the committee or parties to be discussed at the directions hearing. Again, it's really an open call if there's information which is not in the ER reports or attachments, if it's not in the tabled documents which have been drawn to our attention by the proponent. If there are any other documents or reports that we should be aware of, we would like those identified identified to the committee. Can I just ask at that point if there are any obvious ones that we don't have, particularly in that table documents list? And again, this is not to stop other reports coming out when it turns out that they are important. It's just to try to start with as complete a set as possible. Okay, I'm not seeing anything specific raised. Proponent Part A submission, direction 19. Is there anything in there, Mr. Forrester, that surprises you or you don't think you can do?
No, thank you.
The starting at section clause 20, direction 20, some fairly standard points about expert witness reports. These are relevant, obviously, to the proponent and also to friends of NIA, Dr. Kelly, if you do decide to call evidence. One thing I wanted to particularly highlight is 20D. We don't understand this occurred in EES Central. Given the bulk of the material that we're grappling with, I don't think it reasonable that we get a short expert witness statement which refers to various sections of the application material, the environment report material. What we would like the expert witness statements to be is a standalone document which includes the expert's opinion on the most important matters that they're giving evidence on. I'm not saying we want 300-page expert witness reports. It'll be a question of judgment as to what's included in those witness reports. But what we definitely don't want is an expert witness report which says, refer to attachment 20, page 37, recommendations for my opinion on this. We want them consolidated into the expert reports. Dr. Kelly?
Member Wimbush, I am looking at the directions from a document that was attached. Oh, bloody. Sorry. The document's just gone. Oh, here it is.
Sorry,
there's no 20. There's no. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
There's no 20D on my list. So have I got a wrong version?
You should be looking at the one that I'm referring to. Unless I hope I haven't renumbered these in my playing around with them. Ms. Kendall, can you shed some light on this?
I can. Just looking at the version that was circulated to all parties, it's 19D, Dr. Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you. Yep.
Oh, I see what I've done. Sorry, in my notes today, I've just put in an extra paragraph number.
Yeah,
which is
no worries.
out everything, so I'll just take that out. Yes, 19D. Thank you, Dr. Kelly, for pointing that out.
That's okay.
Mr. Forrester, do you need any clarification on that point? Thank you. The 20 is the timing for circulation of expert witness reports. Again, part of that is in relation to if there are any other expert witness reports. If there's no other evidence being called, and that's to be confirmed by Dr. Kelly on Wednesday, then we will push the proponent's expert witness reports date back to Monday, 3rd of April. But that's only if there's no other evidence. Given that we are asking for potentially some quite substantial expert witness statements, I think it's reasonable to give the proponent a bit more time to do them if that's possible. But those dates will be contingent on the advice of Dr. Kelly. Day one version of project documentation, that's fairly standard. If there's anything, Mr. Forrester, that's not clear to you in responding to that, let me know. At the round table, in the circulated directions at number 24, in fact, it's 11:30. What we might just do, we've been going for an hour and a half, we might just take a short break there. So if people can not leave the meeting, but just turn their cameras and microphones off, we'll start again at 11:40 a.m. Thank you. Okay, we'll make a start again. Just checking that our main parties are back with us. You could put cameras on, please. Dr. Kelly, are you back with us? Just checking again, Dr. Kelly, given friends of Nia have been interested in many of the issues, I'm reluctant to start without her being back with us. We'll just stand by for a few seconds. Dr. Kelly. Okay, we are a minute or two after the start time, so we'll proceed. Mr. Forrester, firstly, in relation to the new 16 capital A, I'll call it, did you have instructions on that direction?
Yes, Member Wimbush would be assisted by an understanding of what's intended to be referred to by the words conceptual models. It seems to us that this could relate to first the conceptual models upon which operations are intended to be based, and those conceptual models are referred to in the environmental management framework which was exhibited, or it might relate to or be taken to relate to the program of monitoring, evaluation and adaptive management application which would be carried out in the course of operation, or perhaps something else. So Member Wimbush, if we could have that clarification, that would be very helpful.
Thanks, Mr. Forrester. Again, I'll take that one on notice and we'll try and make that clearer when the direction comes out. Does the answer give you particular cause as to whether you can accept the direction or not, if I can put it that way?
My apprehension is we'd be able to abide and comply with the direction, but it to know which direction to which way to go. For your information and notes, I'll note that reference I referred to in the EMF is found at page 20.28.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now moving back to where we were in the directions, the roundtable at direction 24 outlines the circulated version from the committee. On Friday in the notice with the expert evidence from the proponent, there was a suggested version put forward which was broadly similar. The main difference I would suggest is that the site inspection, rather than being done on the Friday towards the end of the themes, is actually brought forward to the Friday, which is Friday the 14th of April, so that the committee has actually been on site before we start getting into the detail of the theme evidence and discussions. at face value, that seems to make sense. That we've seen there's different benefits in doing site inspections before and after. They're certainly done both ways, but I don't have a particular objection to doing the site inspection up front. It gives us some other logistics advantages, which I don't need to go into. So the proponent's suggestion is that we still start on Thursday the 13th, which has always been the start date. We have a full day of introductions, which would be the proponent, and then the submitters, the other participants in the roundtable, would have a brief time through that day to outline their key concerns regarding the merits of the particular projects we're looking at. We would then do the inspections on the 14th of April, and then the following week, starting the 17th of April, Monday through to Thursday, I think most likely, we would investigate those themes in the roundtable. The themes that we identified, and I think they're broadly familiar with the ones the proponent suggested, and there may be others here who have got other suggestions, but aquatic ecology and terrestrial ecology, groundwater and surface water, and then we would have a reserve day, which is Thursday the 20th, where if there are other matters that haven't been addressed in those roundtables, it might be traditional owner issues, it might be something else, we effectively have some time to, on that Thursday the 20th, to consider those other matters. Also, if those, what I'll call the major themes, go longer than expected, we also have a bit of slippage room into Thursday the 20th as well. Can I perhaps just ask for, at this stage, for general comments from other parties on the themes themselves, and then we'll talk about timing. And I should say the development of these themes have largely come from our understanding at this early stage of what some of the really big matters discussed at the at EES Central were. Obviously, as I've said earlier today, there's a lot of material in the environment report, but in terms of the really important issues around reflooding of floodplains, these are the big themes that seem to have popped out. So I could ask for, firstly, for comment on the themes to be used in the roundtable. I'm not seeing any, noting that if there's one that's not there, we will be able to take some time potentially on the Thursday to pick up other issues if they're not identified today. Dr. Kelly.
From what I can see, the themes are 3 themes. Is that right? Groundwater.
Numbers, but the details are groundwater and surface water, aquatic ecology and terrestrial ecology. They're the main ones.
Okay, 2. Yeah.
Whether that's 2, 3 or 4 depends how you cut it up, but those are the ones that I have on my draft directions.
And are you, the word theme is not familiar to me in this context. Can you expand on what theme in this context means?
Let's call it issue. It's not, there's nothing secret about it. It's what's the main matter to be discussed on that day.
Yeah.
Theme, issue, whatever.
Yeah. And is cultural and heritage not there?
That's what I just mentioned. If you were listening, I said if there are other matters such as traditional owner issues or cultural issues, they could be considered on the proponent has suggested is the reserve day, the Thursday, the 20th. So that's what I'm asking. Are there other issues that people think are critical which need a theme day or some time on a day?
Yeah, I would put forward that cultural and heritage should be a theme.
Okay, I'll pop that in. Thank you. Oops, just bear with me. If I'm not making it clear in relation to traditional owners, if as a result of our reaching out, we are contacted by traditional owners who want to engage in some way, either in the roundtable or in some other way, we are completely open to making that happen. So I just want to make it clear, I'm not trying to exclude cultural heritage or TOs from this process. It'll be a question which we address largely based on contact we receive, whether by writing or directly. Any other matters which people think need a theme, if not a full day, sometime in the hearing that they think needs to be discussed as a group, noting that we're doing this in that roundtable format. So it's going to be a discussion, not a this group makes a submission, then that group, then another one.
Could I ask that I would have thought that cultural heritage would be brought up by some sort of authority like Heritage Victoria or whatever the current name of the groups are, of like a peak body of
So I don't have the name in front of me, but certainly submissions are provided to the peak body for, I won't say the peak body for Aboriginal people, that's not correct, but the peak body in terms of Aboriginal cultural heritage. So submissions to this process have been or are to be provided to them under clause 27 of the terms of reference. We are reaching out to the traditional owners, as we've already discussed. We wouldn't normally reach out to that group. Just bear with me.
AAV, is it? Or
no, not anymore. First Peoples State Relations, it's now called, which used to be Aboriginal Victoria, and before that it was Aboriginal Affairs Victoria. So we are providing them information, but we wouldn't normally reach out to them saying, you know, we need you to come and participate in this roundtable. It's really up to them to decide to do that if they wish. But as I said, we are reaching out to the TOs directly through the proponent. That reserve day, the Thursday, we'll keep it. We'll obviously lock it in for some things through this process, but if it turns out we need more time, if there are other issues which come out of left field which we haven't thought about, obviously it'll be incumbent on the committee to consider those and work out how we might consider those in the right roundtable process. So whilst we are trying to get a good handle on this at the moment, we will be flexible if we need to as well.
can I just ask Member Wimbush, there's plenty of documented detail and research reports on the cultural heritage values of the Nivenifera Park. Would you not be requesting or having some sort of whether it's an academic or archaeologist, someone coming to present on those matters, those values?
The short answer is it depends. There is a very extensive Aboriginal cultural heritage report which has been exhibited with the environment report. Whether that encapsulates all the material you're talking about, I don't know at this stage. But if it comes to our attention that there are significant deficiencies in that material, then yes, of course, we would have to consider how we're going to manage that.
So why couldn't you just have as a theme cultural heritage?
I've just said we probably will because you suggested it on the Thursday.
But I'm trying to understand why you needed me to suggest it. Why isn't it already there?
Because my understanding from EES Central is that those ecology and ground and surface water issues were the ones that a lot of time was spent on in EES Central. It's not to say the others are not significant. Of course, the country of our First Nations people is incredibly significant. It's a question of what we're doing in the roundtable and what advice we're giving to government on these issues. Noting that Aboriginal cultural heritage has its own whole set of legislation and regulations, which we don't have an influence over. So this is not, we're not sort of going to suggest something be done in relation to Aboriginal cultural heritage, which is outside of those existing protections. We wouldn't for a start, but would those existing protections still stand? Mr. Decker.
Thank you, Member Wimbush. I'm imagining that considerations with respect to native vegetation policy will be able to be discussed or heard during the time that's scheduled for terrestrial ecology. I'm imagining that, the manner in which the project provides biodiversity benefit and included within that the results of the expert elicitation. I'm hoping or imagining that, the day in which terrestrial ecology has been scheduled, those matters may be considered or heard, particularly around how the project addresses native veg guidelines and the potential application of the conservation works exemption. It's not necessarily, we don't think that we need to table or discuss impacts that the project proposes to environmental matters, but rather how the project addresses the native veg guidelines and biodiversity benefits. So I'm just wondering if that, in your mind, fits into the day that's being allocated for terrestrial ecology.
Yes, it does, Mr. Decker. As we work through the directions, you'll see we're still asking for submissions up front on a range of matters, as well as we have the submissions which have already been made, including by DECA, to the process. DECA is one of the 14 we've already got. So yes, the short answer is yes. If there are outstanding issues to be discussed around that, and I gather that was a topic of some discussion in EES Central, then that is the time we would do it, in those theme days.
Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Kelly?
I'm just wondering, with those themes, and sorry to ask this, but having never dealt with a roundtable and like if something else comes up that's not within those themes, are you going to allow that to be discussed?
The point of doing it as a roundtable is it's meant to be more informal and exploratory. If in the course of the roundtable theme on groundwater, it turns out that there's an issue which is quite critical to groundwater, which is not kind of logically fitting into one of those themes, then yes, we would consider how we would need to address that. There's obviously lots of judgment in that the committee will need to make as to how critical it is and whether we think it needs more time on another day or more time on that day. But the central idea of the themes is to start with those issues. If other things come up, we can make a call on the go as to whether we need more time to discuss them, and if so, when, possibly pushing it back to that other Thursday that we're talking about.
So we can be assured that the fact that you've set themes is not going to mean that anything outside those themes is going to be ruled out as not being able to be discussed.
No, that's not what I said. What I said is if there are critical issues which come out in our discussions on, for example, groundwater, which we think need further exploration and they don't logically fit into those themes, then we will consider it. We may well rule it out, but we will consider it. That's all I'm saying. And again, this is in a context where we've got substantial written submissions already. I would not be expecting brand new issues to pop out in the roundtable. It'll be exploring the material we've already got.
Yeah, but have you taken the themes from the submissions?
The submissions have come, sorry, the themes, as I mentioned, have largely derived from discussions with the ES Central people, as I outlined earlier, because they seem to be the major themes which were discussed in EES Central, noting that that was a full hearing and this is a more limited roundtable. This is not meant to capture all the things that were discussed in EES Central, because it clearly doesn't.
No, and I think it will capture things that weren't discussed there, because they're at different locations, different people, different situations.
Absolutely. And of course, we would need to consider those.
Thank you.
Okay, so just in terms of the outline, we'll firm that up. I think the general outline that was suggested in the correspondence of 17 March is what we will work with. The main change will be we will have a day of introductions, and then a day for people to think about that, which I actually think is probably a really good thing for people to be able to reflect on those day one submissions. And then we'll start week 2 on the 17th of April with the theme days, noting that we'll schedule a cultural heritage time on the Thursday and other matters that may come up. I'm just moving to direction 25, which just articulates what's going to happen on day 1. Effectively, we'll be wanting a brief project outline from the proponent, and then the other parties to the roundtable, we will ask to do brief highlight submissions of their main issues that they're concerned about. The focus should be on the themes, because that's what we're going to be talking about for the week. But if there are other matters which are not in the themes but are in the written submissions we've already got, then people in that time should feel free to bring them to our attention as well. It's really a sort of a scene setting day, if you like, for the theme days to start on the following Monday. Moving on to 28, evidence and questioning. As I've already said, expert evidence is welcome. Mr. Decker, sorry, I'll just take that before I move on.
My apologies, Member Wimbush. Just before we moved past or into evidence and questioning, I just thought it worth asking or noting that DEEC is still considering the content and representation of a potential verbal submission. I'll make myself available through the entire hearing, but we do touch our submission and our interests cross over a number of different subject matters, and we have subject matter experts that have, provided input into our submission. I just thought it worth, if appropriate and in keeping with the terms of reference, seek some guidance from the committee around their preference for us to provide, I guess, the right people at the right time through proceedings. Noting that it is going to be less formal and more conversational, sort of imagining that, myself providing representation for DEECA and matters coming up that I might not necessarily have the expertise in, that, and we do wish to facilitate, good engagement and discussion on the matters that the committee would seek our advice on. Also noting that we don't wish to provide expert witnesses as such. How DEECA might go about ensuring that we have the right people for the right matters to assist the committee.
Thanks, Mr. Decker. It's an interesting question, and from our point of view, the starting point would be we think it would be useful, obviously, to hear from subject matter experts from DEECA in those themes. I understand you're not calling them as expert witnesses. And given we don't have cross-examination in this forum anyway, I think I'm just thinking off the top of my head, and I'll call for comments on this in a minute, but it would seem to me that having subject matter experts who are there to, if not present, but at least to be instructing you, perhaps engaged in the discussion, it would seem to make sense in terms of trying to bring out the department's best material, so to speak, on the issues that are under discussion. So my thoughts are to give Mr. Forrester something to think about, that we would certainly be happy for them to be there. We would want to know up front who those people are. And we would also want to know, and I'll come back to submissions in a minute, but we'll be asking for submissions from parties prior to the roundtable. So if they have material they're likely to bring forward in the theme day, we would expect that would be provided prior to the start of the roundtable. So again, we wouldn't expecting your subject experts to be dropping new material on the table in the roundtable, but I would think it would be useful to have them responding to evidence, perhaps putting on the table other matters for discussion in that meeting style format.
Thank you. Noting EES Central and other hearings of a similar nature, often we take questions on notice, and that enables us to reach out to our various experts and also sort of brief up internally and get endorsement on these highly technical and important considerations. So I'm imagining that questions on notice will still be able to be undertaken. It's just, I was sort of thinking through this less formal, more conversational approach, and you know, myself being drawn into matters that would probably best be addressed with some of our experts, and just fitting into the process so that it works for all.
Yeah. Again, probably I'd suggest that coming out of EES Central, you and your subject matter experts, noting that we do have different projects here and there are some differences in terms of threatened species and so on, but the larger issues of principle, I would have thought your team would be fairly well across already coming out of EES Central. So again, I would still anticipate that in submissions prior to the roundtable, that your areas of concern or interest are clearly articulated in that. When there's therefore, if there's then follow-up matters in the roundtable, we're dealing with them in a bit more detail rather than, again, trying to interrogate or introduce new issues. I'll try and give a bit more guidance around this in the directions following today, but there's going to be a little bit of suck it and see as well, I think, in terms of how we manage that. But I do, yeah, again, the principles that we're trying to balance are getting everything on the table that is of use and relevant to us, but also not being unfair to any particular party in bringing forward new material in the middle of the round table, for example. Mr. Forrester, did you have any comments on that?
On those matters raised by Mr. Decker?
Yes.
I tend to adopt the position expressed most recently, in the sense that it's likely to be a matter of suck it and see in large part. Otherwise, would note, just with Deacon as a submitter and who is intending to be heard and to participate, there's no reason they ought not have the same opportunity as any other submitter. I'd also note that in large part, we'll do all we can to assist in this regard, and in large part, a number of the matters which will be, which are addressed through the DECA written submission and which might otherwise be relevant to relevant themes, relate to matters upon which we'll be referring the committee to material from EES Central. And so there'll be a bit of management to do in respect of what we talk about during the theme days and what's otherwise already been addressed in documentation. But the long and short of it is, as a submitter, DECA will participate and we'll do what we can to be facilitative along the way.
Yeah. Okay, as I said, thank you for that, Mr. Forrester. I'll try and make that a bit clearer, Mr. Decker, in the directions. So yes, again, how that actually works in practice in the hearing, the roundtable, whether for that whole section you have some of your specialist experts as the leads, or whether again they're just sitting advising you. If there's a particular technical point to be explained, we might give leave for one of them to actually participate for a brief time in the discussion. I mean, we'll just see how we go and see if there are objections to it at the time, depending on what we're proposing. But in principle, yes, we want their input. That's a starting principle.
Thank you, Member Winbush and Mr. Forrester. Yeah, certainly no plans to try and introduce new material, really just making sure we have the right people on hand to best facilitate and assist the process. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just moving on to evidence and questioning. Those directions are reasonably clear. There's not formal cross-examination, but there will be the opportunity to ask questions of expert witnesses. The hot tubbing I won't talk about in too much detail, but effectively if there are experts in a same field being called by another party, we propose that they be called or sit together, and one will give their evidence and then the other. And then if parties have questions and comments and what have you on the material, we'll just need to make it clear who the questions are being put to, and we'll do it reasonably carefully. If there's only one party, if it's only the proponent who is calling expert evidence, then obviously their expert witness will give their presentation as we proposed. Then there'll be questions. As I said earlier, my expectation is that the expert would still stay there through the course of the theme, so that if other issues come up which they may have a comment on, they can participate in that with their expert knowledge. For example, if a DECA subject matter expert, subject matter professional, I won't call them an expert, does come up with an issue which requires commentary from the proponent's expert witness. Sorry, I'm just going to...
Member Winbush, you've muted yourself.
Can you hear me? As usual, in those few seconds I was muted, I said the wisest words of the day and I can't remember what they were. But we will manage expert witnesses somewhat differently to a normal hearing process, and expect them to be there and participate, obviously not as a party or an advocate, but to respond to matters that are put to them through the course of the themes. Let me just have a look through those directions. I don't think I need to go through them in detail. We may have witnesses participating remotely. If that's the case, the usual rules about who's with them will still apply, even though if they were in the room, obviously there would be other people there. We can go through those if there are witnesses proposing to log in remotely, so to speak, into the theme days. Just moving on to 36, the submissions. As I mentioned, we expect that parties, having considered the expert evidence, having considered the other submissions that have been made, would provide a written submission to the roundtable by 12 noon on Wednesday, the 12th of April. So that's before the roundtable starts. And that will be a submission which articulates the party's position, particularly on the theme days. If there are other matters which have been raised in the original submission which require further articulation, that written submission due on the 12th of April will be the place to do that. Given the way this is being run and the timing we have, there are a lot of issues, I suspect, which we won't even be talking about. They'll be in written material, but we'll be taking them on the papers, as they say, rather than going through them in great detail in the roundtables itself. We'll also be asking for day one version of the documents. I think we've asked for that previously, but it's put in, restated in that submission, 36C. And there's a number of directions about how it will work within the roundtable. So I'd ask people to have a look at that in quite some detail. We will, on the Wednesday, the 26th of April, which will be an online day, have brief closings from parties and also from the proponent. I would ask that be brief. They be brief, and I'll provide further directions on those through the course of the roundtable. What we're not looking for is a suitcase dump full of material on the last day. We would expect that would be only matters, only brief submissions responding to matters that have been discussed in the roundtable. If there's a significant amount of new material, in our view, that's being introduced at that point, we'll consider that at the time. But the intent is not to have a large new amount of material introduced at that stage. If there is new material that's coming forward because it's called for in the roundtable, or because something is an issue which people didn't think was an issue, again, we'll keep a track of that through the roundtable and get that circulated as soon as possible within the roundtable environment. 39 to 42 is just standard electronic presentation. 43. 44, the final day version of the documents, including material that's been considered in the roundtable. We've asked for that on 12 noon on Monday, the 24th of April. We recognise that's a day which is a bit of a lost day in terms of between the weekend and Anzac Day. But if we're to return to close off matters on the 26th, we're going to need that material either on that day or perhaps even on the afternoon of the Friday, but we'll leave it as the Monday, the 24th of April at this time. And there's some standard directions about personal information, compliance with directions. So that brings us to the end of the draft directions. Can I ask parties if there are any other matters they need to bring to my attention before we move to closing the directions hearing? I'm not seeing any hands up. Ms. Hogan.
Thank you, Chair, and I apologise if this has been covered already, but just seeking some clarification as to when or how parties should advise the committee whether they intend to appear in person or online.
That's a good question. I will put that in the directions. I don't think it's in there. We have some indication from those who wish to be heard. Rather than running through that at the moment, what I'll do is I'll re-ask the question in the directions, because people may have changed their mind about whether they want to be there or whether they want to be online. So I'll ask that be advised by perhaps by the end of next week or something like that, but I will put that in the directions. Okay, Dr. Kelly.
Member Wimbush, that all seems very clear, thank you. But in that letter from the proponent on the 17th of March, they've said this would enable the committee to have the benefit of context afforded by the site inspection before the hearing days, the theme days, sorry. So I just think that a note that they are saying that there is a benefit afforded by a site inspection, and I want it noted that the EES central package did not have a site inspection of all members that I know of, which to me makes their decision not as legitimate.
Thank you. for obvious reasons, I'm not going to go into why they did or didn't do that. I mean, my understanding was that, as I said, there were certain environmental conditions why they didn't do that. But they did that. That's not something I can redress through this process. I would just say, again, on the site inspections, and your previous comments are noted, you don't need to restate them about, and Ms. Hogan's for that matter, about accompanied versus unaccompanied. I just want to make it clear, we are planning that unaccompanied day, but as with any hearing or roundtable, we absolutely reserve that right to do further inspections. So if it turns out that it is critical we do an accompanied inspection with some of the parties, whether it be traditional owners or locals, in our view, whether we think that's critical based on what we hear at the roundtable, we reserve that right. So this is not a blanket, that's the site inspection, that's it. It may be, but we reserve the right to do further if we need to. And it may be after our general overview day, this is very common, that it turns out we had a look at site A, but we actually need to look at site A with different eyes based on what we've heard in the roundtable. So yeah, I'm just making the comment that we reserve that right.
Thank you, that's reassuring.
Okay, any other matters that people wish to raise before we close the directions hearing? Mr. Forrester.
Thank you, Member Wimbush. I thought I might just come back to a note that you made right at the commencement of the directions hearing in respect of the potential use by or regard to the report of the committee appointed to consider the EES Central projects. And while ultimately this probably comes back to a question of matters to be managed by the time we get to day one or thereafter of the roundtable itself, I thought it useful to identify that from the proponent's perspective, consistently with the discussions that this presently constituted committee, or that the committee constituted for these projects have already had with the EES Central committee, there would be expected utility in this committee having regard to anything and everything that it can in respect of the EES Central considerations and findings or conclusions. And indeed, insofar as clause 44 of the committee's terms of reference doesn't merely allow the committee to have regard to documentation that parties might point to, but rather provides for the committee to use relevant understandings to assist with common matters and consistency across the projects. It might be, on one view, necessary that if there's a report which exists and there's a position which exists that certain findings or recommendations have been made, it would be appropriate and consistent with the committee's terms of reference for this committee to have regard to those. This is a matter we've been directly grappling with in terms of our formulation of the best responses to the draft directions around our identification of key issues and those sorts of things. How's that best done without knowledge of what that committee itself considered to be those issues? And that's acknowledged and identified in the directions, and something we'll work with. But you raised, Member Wimbush, a question about how that's best handled in terms of procedural fairness. And the first aspect of that I'd like to address you briefly on relates to the extent to which a lot of that information, a lot of the findings and recommendations might relate to matters which would now be subject to the committee's draft direction 3. So, for example, any findings or conclusions in respect of policy or the relevance of policy would be of obvious assistance to this committee, but which would be able to be referred to without any concern about natural justice being curtailed in circumstances where that's expressly conceived by the terms of reference. The other way in which this might be relevant, though, is in respect of matters such as the drafting of project controls. So it is the case that the proponent proposes, for example, environmental delivery standards, which are effectively consistent across projects. And there are, for example, certain recommendations from the EPA in respect of them, and they apply across the projects. And so in the interest of consistency in dealing with those common matters, it would also be useful where those things are outside the scope of Direction 3 and very much inside the scope of what this committee is considering, for this committee to have regard to findings and recommendations. If it's possible for the committee to do so, it would seem appropriate for this to be something that's raised at the earliest opportunity with the parties, so for the opportunity for submissions, which might allow us to identify from the parties' perspective whether there's any relevant difference arising in the context of these projects or having regard to submissions that have been made. But again, I draw the committee back to that clause 44 of its terms of reference and the clear conceptualisation by the Minister that this committee might have regard to those matters. Again, probably a matter that is best dealt with on day one once we get to that position and to dealing with the way the roundtable will be conducted. But I thought to raise this now, lest the committee have some apprehension about continuing to refer to or having regard to what would be new material between now and the roundtable. And in my submission, there need be no apprehension or concern about those matters. They can be managed as appropriate.
Thanks, Mr. Forrester. Just to perhaps just put a few thoughts. These are not decisions or directions, but the issues that we've been grappling with as the larger SIAC. Yes, clause 44 certainly says build on learnings, and that in short form, and that obviously makes sense to do so when we've got 9 different projects across the 4 tranches. The problematic things we've been dealing with are EES Central will produce findings and recommendations. I could ask Ms. Kendall to put her cards on the table, Member Kendall to put her cards on the table today. She would obviously know the direction those findings and recommendations are going in, but I, of course, am not going to do that, and they may not be fully resolved anyway, I don't know. The issue is if that report is, say it's finished, for example, say it's submitted to the Minister as it's required to be prior to this roundtable commencing, in a situation where I, as a member of SIAC, can, in theory, get access to those findings and recommendations, but I'm not in a position to bypass the Minister and provide them to the other parties to the hearing. So those are the sorts of things we're, I'm concerned about as the chair of this tranche, in that I'm not doing the roundtable in full knowledge that EES Central has said certain things about a particular issue, which I don't think I'm in a position to divulge to parties. So that's why I said it's an ongoing discussion internally. Having said that, your advice is appreciated, that you're not sort of fundamentally objecting to that cross flow of information because it is countenanced in the terms of reference. So ideally, if this had worked out in the perfect world that we always look for, the EES Central would have done its work, given its report to the Minister. The report would have been released with the Minister's view on all the matters in it. We're obviously not going to be in that position, I'd suggest. So we have to work our way through how, as best we can in the circumstances that we're in. As I said earlier today, I'm not answering the question because we're still pondering it, but we'll keep pondering it and see how we go as we get towards our roundtable.
Yes, thank you. It's edifying to hear you summarise the message I was trying to convey so accurately, and that's all from me. Thank you, Member Wimbush.
Thank you, Mr. Forrester. Okay, are there any other matters before we draw to a close this morning? Sorry, this afternoon. Thank you for bearing with us as we've worked through a range of issues. Final directions will come out probably later this week, and in that will be a more refined timetable for the roundtable, as well as all the venue information and the other details. There's a few items that we have to clarify in those directions, and we'll make sure we do that before they're circulated later this week. Let me just check something here. Yeah, so when those final directions and timetable for the roundtable do come out, I'd ask people to read it very, very carefully. I know it is lengthy and it contains a lot of information, but there will again be some critical dates in there which people need to look at. And just a final reminder, Dr. Kelly, if you could confirm by Wednesday, as we agreed, end of Wednesday, as to whether you're likely to call, not likely to, going to call expert evidence or not. Before we close, you've just got your hand raised. Is there anything else?
Yeah, look, I'm really sorry, but that issue that happened with the EES Central, where there was trolling or some sort of interruption to the transmission and strange messages and things, could we make sure that doesn't happen? Because that was actually quite off-putting, I'm sure, for everybody.
Yes, thank you. I do understand there was an unfortunate incident, if I can put it that way. PPV behind the scenes have been working very, very closely with the proponent on the Zoom arrangements, not on anything else. We do have a much more locked down hearing, not to the point where those who need to legitimately observe or participate are locked out, but we do have arrangements in place which we are hopeful, more than hopeful, we are comfortable will ensure that that doesn't happen again. But yes, I don't think anyone would disagree with you. Obviously, I wasn't there, but it was a fairly unpleasant situation as I understand it. So we will work very hard to ensure that doesn't happen again. Thank you. On that note, we will now close the hearing there. Thank you everyone for your attendance today. Keep an eye out for those directions, and we will then move towards the roundtable on the 13th of April. Thank you and good afternoon.